It's my understanding that prior to the 1930s, that may have been the very first time that any so-called Christian denomination had decided that they were going to no longer see the use of contraception as a moral problem, but rather to see it as a realm of Christian liberty. And unfortunately, I find it problematic that in some Christian circles, the realm of what one would categorize as Christian liberty seems to be broadening, and the more it broadens, the more it subsumes actual areas that, morally speaking, we should take a lot more seriously than we do. Unfortunately, things like contraception since the 1970s, 1960s, with the invention of the birth control pill, or what was most popular at the time, which isn't the form that usually is circulating in our culture today, saturated the culture, became commonplace, and unfortunately it influences too many people. Sometimes we grow up in a culture and, like a fish in water, we just kind of absorb the zeitgeist, right? We kind of just absorb the spirit of the age, and sometimes without our consciously knowing it, we are adopting certain philosophical ideas of being influenced in very subtle ways, to the point where some people, it seems like they don't even get to a point in their life in certain areas of study where they question certain aspects of their thinking. They never got to the point where they're thinking about their thinking and critiquing it and seeing that maybe our ideas aren't as good as we might think that they are. I, for one, have made intellectual errors in the past. I've even made those errors public, and have corrected those errors, apologized for them, and set out to explain even better ideas. And I think this is something that's just part of the human experience. But I think too often some people, they just end up parroting things that they have received. In a sense, they have received them. They're tradition to them, through the culture, through their parents, through their peers. That's a big one as well. But this area of contraception is so pervasive. Back in college, I did I think it was it was a persuasive speech. I had to choose a topic for an informative speech and a persuasive speech. I chose stem cell research for my informative, and then for my persuasive, I decided to go with talking about contraceptions. Basically, contraception, as I would define them, would be any bodily mutilation, physical obstructions, or chemical manipulations of the body. In a way, someone could look at, well, these are, it's kind of like a pharmaceutical. It makes sense that there are times where we try to bring the individual to health, right? So as we bring a person to health, sometimes it may require that we might have something outside of ourselves. We basically do this with the different foods that we eat. Some are better for us than other foods. They help with mood, like herbs and things of that nature. Like St. John's wort and home remedies and other things can have long-lasting effects upon the individual, but usually towards a goal of health or getting the body to function better, optimally, towards health. Whereas some pharmaceuticals, such as like the birth control, it is specifically meant to get the body to function. Well, in a sense, it tricks the brain into thinking that a woman is in a perpetual state of pregnancy, so it doesn't go through the brain doesn't trigger the luteinizing process in the ovaries and so on and so forth. So I don't see it being towards health, because it's actually getting the body to not function as it normally does in its natural state. So when I say chemical manipulations, hopefully it's understood that it's chemically changing or altering the normal processes away from the way that they function normally, right? So I would define contraception as bodily mutilation. This could be purposely getting like a hysterectomy or getting a tubal ligation, something that is for the purpose of avoiding pregnancy, right? Or in the case of the man, it could be a vasectomy, which is the severing of the vas deferens. And that's the most commonly done procedure, but they can also go horribly wrong. In the case of Michael Scott on The Office, he in the midst of his relationship with Jan, he claims to have had 3 vasectomies because he kept reversing them because they kept changing their mind. He's like, do you have any idea the toll that 3 vasectomies has on a man? Oh, it was funny. I laughed so hard. It was very funny, but it points out an unfortunate truth: how quickly we are to, for the sake of convenience, be drawn to artificial means of doing certain things. And there's 2 issues with this. 2 issues. According to Code of Canon Law, when it comes to marriage, 2 people go down to the altar, they say, I do, they're in front of the priest, they're in front of the church. The marriage is said to be merely ratified. Okay? The relationship is not said to be consummated until the marital act. And in the midst, it's assumed, not assumed, it's defined that it is an act that's open to life for the procreation and education of children. Now, if 2 people have lived together after a marriage has been ratified, canon law assumes that this has taken place, but de facto may actually not have taken place if contraception is involved. If contraception is involved, it's not considered a sexual act per se. It's an act of mutual masturbation, right? A sexual act, as opposed to, an asexual process in plants and whatnot, is an actual act toward the procreation, right? So there's an openness to life. There's an intent there, that the natural end towards which the act is directed, right, is in accordance with the natural processes. So that's sort of problematic in my mind, because, other than the assumption that is made de jure according to church law, it's assumed that the marriage has been consummated. The reason why that's even a thing is because 2 people, and this is referred to as the Petrine privilege, I believe it is. So you could have 2 people who have had a marriage merely ratified, hasn't been consummated yet, and one of them decides that they don't want to go through the consummation and the lifelong commitment. despite the fact that they said I do and all of that stuff at the altar and before the priest and church and God and everything else. The Pope can dispense with that because, once again, it's been merely ratified. It has not been fully consummated. Has not been consummated. The second aspect to this is that the marriage is to be open. You know, this happens a lot with people who. All right, so this is the problem, right? So in Catholic theology, when it comes to the sacrament of matrimony, there's no such thing as a childless marriage. Okay. Now, granted, somebody may be infertile and stuff like that. All of this is understandable, right? This is not what we're talking about. We're talking about people conceptualizing a marriage not being open to life. That's not a marriage. And the fact that people don't understand that is why they misapply marriage or reduce it or distill it down to even smaller parts and then try to say, oh, all you need to have is, two individuals who are consenting to lifelong commitment, and sometimes not even that. All right. So, yeah, there's no such thing as a marriage without children. There has to be an openness to the act. That's the natural place where. Now, obviously, the only critiques are not ones of coming from natural law or the Code of Canon Law or Catholic theology. It's, oh, this is just an inconvenience to me. You mean I can't spend close time with my wife while she's fertile? Not if you don't want to have kids, no. You avoid those times. And I would advise people to, instead of resorting to artificial means of controlling these things, how about you actually use your willpower and control yourself? All right, develop virtue, develop self-control. Someone might argue, well, what if my will is pretty weak in this area? Well, you'll have to find solutions to strengthen your will, or just not be around your wife a lot. Stay busy during that time. Write a book. Go on vacation for a week. I don't care what you do. Just don't sit there and complain about it. Second, it creates an opportunity for the man and the woman to learn more about their bodies and how it works. I spent time understanding my wife's cycle, the female reproductive system, how it works biologically, and we've been using natural family planning now for close to 20 years of marriage, and we've been perfectly happy with it. When we did things when it was more of a risk and we got children out of it, I'm like, yeah, we should have waited a few more days, or we should have did it at a different time. And for the most part, we've had a lot of practice with discipline over the years that has made this very effective. Now, someone might ask, well, if the act is directed towards the procreation of children, or for it to be considered like a sexual act or whatnot, but you're doing something at a time that's infertile, or you're purposely and using your intent to avoid such times. Well, number one, it's not artificial, all right, and one would be much better served by engaging in self-mastery. One particular issue is I knew a guy. He was using contraception. She was on the pill, right? So they were like using multiple forms, and she still ended up getting pregnant. They would have known to avoid. They would have known and understood the signs and everything else associated with it in order to avoid pregnancy if they wish, to space out their children or not to have any more children, So it has to do with natural means of addressing such things, and also has to do with the the intent, so the openness, right? It has to do with openness. Because even though, like my wife and I, we purposely use the infertile periods, women are not rabbits, okay? They don't ovulate because of interactions. Women are actually only fertile uh, for like a 48-hour period. And the only reason why that gets extended is because of how long semen can live, you know, in certain types of cervical mucus, which kind of opens that window to, 5 or 6 days. Uh, Women, for the most part, are infertile most of the time. So it's not like this is a horribly difficult thing for people to do. Another a good facet of natural family planning is that it actually helps people to know exactly when to engage in behavior when they're actively trying to have children. So it works. It works both ways. But what bothers me on a personal scale is I've known quite a few people in my life who have used all kinds of different types of contraception, got vasectomies and this, that, and everything else, or someone got their tube, had a tubal ligation, and I can't help but think, I don't think that this is good for people, and I wish that I would have had an influence in their life. Like, how do you bring up such a conversation with somebody? I don't know. All I know is that I've had too many friends who have done these things to themselves, and unfortunately, it's difficult to deal with on an ethical level for me now, because now every act, right, every so-called marital embrace in which they engage is no longer a sexual act per se, right? Because there's no goal of sexual reproduction involved whatsoever. It involves their genitals, so I can call it mutual masturbation, but I can't really. And the problem is the problem is even worse than that. It's engaging in acts that are close to life are considered to be immoral. So now people are setting themselves up for habitual immoral behavior, right? Because the marital act has been abused and it's being misused. And it's difficult to look at that stuff. It's the same thing for when I see people who have been validly married, and then they abandon their spouse, or there may be some other issues going on, and then they end up getting into a legal marriage with somebody else, and now they're living a life of perpetual adultery. And there's quite a few of them in our culture who are doing this to themselves, and because they're in a state of perpetual grave matter, that they can no longer present themselves in a worthy manner, for the sacrament of the Eucharist. So it's a huge problem morally. It's frustrating to me, because once a person makes these kinds of decisions, what do you tell them now? If I meet a friend I haven't seen in 10 years and they're on their third wife, and they've been with this one for like 10 years, for like 8 years or something, it's like, you're living a life of adultery. And it's difficult, because they want me to treat their significant other as a spouse, as if this is their wife, when I know it's not. I'm not gonna do that. My aunt wanted to, introduce her, you know, Larry, legal married partner to my family, and I told her no. I wasn't trying to be a jerk. I'm just like, you're not going to come over to my house and parade this man in front of my children as if it is your husband when it's not. And I said that just like that. I said, I'm sorry that you've done this to yourself. You've justified immorality. I'm sorry that's the way you've come to interpret scripture and everything else, but it's so I get frustrated. I'm getting frustrated because I don't know what to do in these situations. Where you have these divorced and so-called remarried couples in the Catholic Church sitting side by side and they can't go to communion. Like you're not in union with the church until you fix your situation. What are you going to do? Even you might even have kids involved now. Oh, what tangled web we weave. It frustrates me because it's not good for them. It's not good for their situation. And it's a hassle ethically to try to address because of the perpetual state in which they have placed themselves. So I think for me, I wish that I had more opportunities to tell my friends, to tell my family, listen, don't mess with contraception, have a conversation with me. Even if they come to disagree with my conclusions, at least they thought about it and hashed it out with somebody who was thinking the opposite of what they felt that they were, intending to do.